cop laughs as black woman faces court, until she reveals she's a federal prosecutor. Sometimes justice is found in the most unexpected places, and sometimes it wears an unexpected face. In a courtroom bustling with tension, a black woman stands accused of a crime that seems all too trivial. Yet the smug grin of a certain police officer suggests there's more to this case than meets the eye. Laughter echoes, fueled by prejudice and the certainty that she has no power to fight back. But what they don't realize is that this isn't just any defendant. Beneath the quiet dignity of this woman stands a truth waiting to be revealed, and a reckoning that will leave everyone speechless. In the heart of Chicago's legal district, the Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse rose above the bustling downtown streets. Lawyers, plaintiffs, defendants, and law enforcement officials converged daily in this hive of order and chaos. But on a brisk morning in early fall, amid the usual throng of people filing in, there was a tension that crackled like static in the air. A young black woman, her hair pulled back into a neat bun, paused on the sidewalk. She drew a slow breath. This was not the day she had planned for, nor the way she had expected to enter the building she knew so well. Her name was Aaliyah Henderson, and although she stood quietly among the busy pedestrians, her mind swirled with the disarray of the past 48 hours. Just a day ago, she had been driving home from a long work session at the local office of the Department of Justice, where she served as a federal prosecutor, when flashing lights in her rearview mirror changed everything. The traffic stop had started innocently enough. However, it quickly devolved into a humiliating experience with an officer who seemed all too eager to wield his authority against her. Officer Bradley Kincaid, a local policeman with a smug look perpetually plastered to his face, had pulled Aaliyah over allegedly for speeding. But the speed limit sign and her speedometer told a different story. The moment he approached her window, hostility had burst forth like a slow-burning fire suddenly doused in gasoline. Perhaps it was the color of her skin, or maybe it was the expensive car she was driving. Whatever the catalyst, Kincaid's hostility was undeniable. He asked for her license and registration with a sneer and demanded she step out of her vehicle. He wouldn't say why, only repeated the command. Fear and anger churned in the pit of her stomach, but she complied. Aaliyah was all too familiar with the ways a simple traffic stop could escalate, especially for black men and women. She had spent part of her career prosecuting those who abused their badge, but ironically, she had never personally been on the receiving end of that targeted disdain, until now. She recalled how Kincaid forced her to stand on the side of the busy street while he searched her car. He treated her like a criminal from the outset, rummaging through her glove box and trunk without cause. When she politely asked what exactly he was looking for, he barked at her to keep quiet. The tension rose with each passing minute, with Kincaid's eyes darting from her driver's license photo to her face, as though he didn't believe she was who she claimed to be. When he spotted a Department of Justice ID badge tucked into her wallet, he paused for only a moment, eyes narrowing. But instead of backing down or apologizing, he scoffed. "This some kind of joke?" he asked, brandishing the ID in front of her as if it were contraband. "You a Fed, huh?" He didn't let her answer. His smug grin only broadened as he called for backup. Within minutes, 3 more squad cars arrived. She was patted down like a violent offender. Bystanders slowed their cars or peered out from the sidewalk, some recording on their phones. Aaliyah's heart drummed in her chest. She was not a stranger to the possibility of police misconduct. She'd indicted officers herself. But being trapped in the center of it felt surreal. A slow quake of shame and panic rippled through her. Aaliyah had grown up idolizing the rule of law. She believed wholeheartedly that justice was not a facade, that it could be pursued and achieved. This unwavering faith in the legal system had carried her through law school and into the Department of Justice. Yet here she was, pinned against her car by a man who presumably pledged to serve and protect, an officer who took her compliance as submission, but still acted like she might attack at any moment. His crew rifled through her personal effects, rummaging through her neatly organized trunk filled with case files for her ongoing investigation, one strictly related to a major drug trafficking ring. She had been working around the clock trying to ensure indictments of several dangerous people. Yet Kincaid seized those files and flipped through them, his cold gaze lingering on the official seals. She tried to protest that these were confidential government documents, but he paid no heed. When he finished, Kincaid's sneer was joined by a laugh that felt like rusted nails scraping across metal. "Lady, you think just because you got some fancy job at the DOJ it makes you untouchable? Let's see how you fare in county lockup." And before she could process his words, she was being handcuffed. The chill of the metal on her wrist stung with an icy reality. She was under arrest, and her pleas for clarity fell on deaf ears. The next hours blurred in a haze of questions, cell phone calls, and humiliations. She was taken to the local precinct and forced to sit alone in a holding cell. By the time a local attorney friend managed to call in favors for her release, it was well past midnight. Kincaid had slapped her with a laundry list of charges: resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, and even possession of stolen property, due to some bizarre claim about her DOJ documents. Even the desk sergeant had seemed unsure about the validity of these charges, but procedures were followed as if everything were normal. Upon her release, Aaliyah was left to gather the fragments of her dignity and walk out into the night. She had never felt more powerless, despite knowing the law inside out. The next day she learned she was summoned to court, her court, in a twisted sense, though she was not used to being on the defendant's side. This brought her to the steps of the Dirksen courthouse, a building she knew intimately, but not from this humiliating vantage point. She looked at her watch, 9:15 a.m. She was due in a small criminal courtroom on the 3rd floor at 10 a.m., but before that, she had to straighten out a few calls. She needed to contact her direct supervisor at the DOJ and explain everything. She needed to make sure there would be no conflict of interest. She needed to ensure that no one thought she was somehow misusing her title to wriggle out of trouble. The gravity of the situation weighed on her like an anvil. Her phone buzzed. It was her friend, Assistant U.S. Attorney Carmela Reyes, texting to say she was on her way. Carmela had caught wind of the fiasco and promised to stand by her side, not just as moral support, but also as a voice that carried weight in the local legal community. Aaliyah texted a quick reply of thanks, then squared her shoulders. She would not cower. She was a fighter, always had been. If Kincaid and his superiors wanted a showdown, they were about to get one. But deep down, fear coiled around her heart. She worried not so much about her own innocence, because she knew the charges were baseless. Rather, she worried about the public spectacle, about the ripples this might send through her professional life. The press loved stories of corruption and scandal. And although the real scandal here was police misconduct, the narrative could easily be twisted. The notion that a federal prosecutor was caught up in potential wrongdoing. The tabloids would have a field day. When she finally stepped inside the courthouse, the metal detectors beeped quietly, and the guards waved her through with a nod. They recognized her as a DOJ attorney. Ironically, the system on autopilot still treated her as an insider. Her heart pounded as she walked the familiar corridors. She had prosecuted cases in front of many of the judges here. She had spent hours perfecting opening statements, constructing airtight arguments, and winning convictions. Now, stepping into a cramped courtroom reserved for misdemeanor and lower-grade felonies, she felt a crushing sense of displacement. Seated at the prosecution's table was a man in a cheap suit who reeked of ambition. And behind him, leaning against the bench with a confident smirk, was Officer Bradley Kincaid, the man who had turned her life upside down. He was laughing, swapping jokes with a bailiff and another officer, glancing at her occasionally. Each time, his grin only grew. Aaliyah felt a hot flush of anger, but forced herself to keep her composure. She breathed deeply. She was about to take a seat at the defendant's table, a table she never thought she'd occupy, when she heard a calm but firm voice call her name. Aaliyah. She turned to see Carmela Reyes hurrying in. The tall, elegant Latina attorney crossed the room and gave Aaliyah's hand a comforting squeeze. "We're gonna end this nonsense," Carmela whispered. Just keep your cool. Aaliyah nodded. She and Carmela took their places. The judge, an older man named Judge Franklin Ross, entered shortly thereafter. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. Everyone rose. The tension soared like a sharp intake of breath. Officer Kincaid's attorney quickly rattled off the charges, each as outrageous as the next. Obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, possession of government property under false pretenses, among others that made little sense. Aaliyah's brow furrowed, and Carmela leaned forward to object to the brazen attempt to spin a traffic stop into a felony case. The prosecutor working with Kincaid insisted that the documents found in Aaliyah's vehicle were not legitimately in her possession. He hinted at possible espionage, as if the files involved national security secrets. In the gallery, a small number of onlookers and reporters from local news outlets watched avidly. Word had spread that a federal prosecutor had been caught with official documents. Some, ironically, were spouting theories that she had been leaking them to criminals, a slander that made Aaliyah's gut churn. When Carmela introduced herself and explained that Aaliyah was indeed a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice, the atmosphere shifted. You could almost see the judge's eyebrows rise. Judge Ross leaned forward, eyes flicking across the bench. "You're telling me the accused is actually one of your colleagues?" he asked, as if the entire notion was absurd. Carmela nodded calmly and produced Aaliyah's credentials. She outlined her official capacity, her ongoing investigations, and how the files in question were part of her legitimate work. A quiet ripple of awareness rolled through the courtroom. Even the bailiff, who had been casually chatting with Kincaid moments earlier, now seemed to step back, uncertain. Still, Kincaid's smirk lingered. He interjected with a theatrical cough and shot a glare at Aaliyah. "We caught her red-handed, Your Honor," he drawled, every word laced with condescension. "Badge or no badge, she was driving recklessly and acted suspicious. That's why I had to detain her. Everything that happened after is a result of her behavior, not my so-called racism." The word hung in the air, racism. Aaliyah felt the pit in her stomach clench. She hadn't directly accused him of racism in the official statement she gave to Internal Affairs, but she suspected it was a factor. Kincaid's dismissive tone now, combined with the open hostility he had shown her, told her everything she needed to know. Carmela rose to her feet, her voice measured but firm. "Your Honor, if this is a matter of reckless driving or resisting arrest, we welcome a thorough review of the traffic stop footage. As for the documents, they are property of the United States government, lawfully in Miss Henderson's possession, which we can verify with immediate contact to the DOJ." The judge made a show of rifling through some papers on his desk, pausing on a few. "I see here, Miss Henderson, that you have an impressive record of service," he said, glancing at her. "I also see that the charges brought against you don't align with the statements provided by the local precinct. They claim you were driving in a manner that led them to suspect, how did they phrase it, felonious intent. That is not a typical classification for a simple traffic violation." Aaliyah steadied her voice. "Your Honor, I was driving within the speed limit and was pulled over without cause. Officer Kincaid then proceeded to search my vehicle without probable cause. He seized confidential federal documents apparently under the assumption that I was impersonating a DOJ employee. My identification was in plain view." Judge Ross nodded, his gaze shifting to Kincaid. "Officer, do you have a dash cam recording that might clarify the nature of this stop?" Kincaid's posture stiffened. "The dash cam wasn't functioning properly that night, Your Honor. Technical error." Aaliyah felt an instinctive wave of skepticism surge through her. She knew dash cam malfunctions occurred, but they were suspiciously common in cases where an officer's conduct might be questionable. Sure enough, Carmela pounced on this point. "No footage. Understood. Then how about any witness statements or body cam footage from the backup officers?" One of the other officers in the courtroom cleared his throat. "We, didn't have the body cams on. We were off duty and just responded because Kincaid needed help." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Ross pursed his lips, clearly unimpressed. "A remarkable series of coincidences," he said dryly. Despite the judge's skepticism, the process trudged forward, dealing more with the formalities than the truth. The prosecutor on Kincaid's side insisted that probable cause existed based on Kincaid's expert observation that Aaliyah was driving erratically. He hammered home that the law did not grant special privileges to government employees if they were indeed breaking the law. Aaliyah clenched her jaw. She knew that everything about this smelled of a personal vendetta, or at least prejudice. The hearing ended with a rescheduling for an evidentiary review. Judge Ross, though polite, did not dismiss the charges outright. Aaliyah's stomach churned at the reality that this ordeal would drag on. She left the courtroom, accompanied by Carmela, feeling the burn of eyes on her back, particularly Kincaid's triumphant stare. Outside in the corridor, the tension unspooled. Carmela let out a small sigh. "That man is shameless," she muttered under her breath. "No body cam, no dash cam, no probable cause. Yet here we are." Aaliyah rubbed her temples. "I need to call my supervisor at the DOJ. We'll get this sorted." Carmela nodded. "We will, but these things take time. Kincaid's buddies in the local precinct might try to stall or bury evidence. We have to be ready for anything." And anything was precisely what came next. Over the following days, Aaliyah found herself in a swirl of bureaucracy, frustration, and anxiety. She filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs, detailing the illegal search and harassment. Simultaneously, she had to handle her actual workload. She was still in the midst of a high-stakes drug trafficking case that she couldn't afford to neglect. Balancing her professional responsibilities with the personal stress of these bogus charges felt like a tightrope walk across a chasm lined with sharpened spikes. Her colleagues at the DOJ were supportive, but she sensed a hint of discomfort in their eyes. No one wanted to accuse a fellow law enforcement officer of racism without concrete proof. Aaliyah understood the nuance. The system didn't like to undermine its own pillars without incontrovertible evidence. It was a harsh reality she had come to know, but living it firsthand felt like a sucker punch. Meanwhile, the media began sniffing around the edges of the story. A few local tabloids published sensational headlines. "Federal prosecutor or felon," one read. Another proclaimed, "DOJ attorney caught with top-secret files." She tried to ignore these distractions, focusing on the real fight, proving her innocence and holding Kincaid accountable. Every night she revisited the memory of that traffic stop in her mind, dissecting every detail. Something about Kincaid's behavior clung to her thoughts. The way he laughed, the way he seemed so certain she wouldn't fight back. She couldn't help but recall the names of countless black men and women who had faced similar abuses of power, some of whom never lived to see justice served. That knowledge ignited a slow fury inside her, an anger that fueled her resolve to see this through no matter the cost. Days turned into a week, and then 2. The date of the evidentiary review approached. More suspicious coincidences surfaced. The precinct claimed it couldn't find logs of Kincaid's call for backup that night. Phone records were lost. The Internal Affairs investigation stalled because the lead investigator was apparently out on leave. At every turn, Aaliyah found red tape and missing pieces. It was as though an unseen hand was orchestrating a cover-up. Yet ironically, Kincaid seemed unbothered. He strutted around the courthouse halls with an arrogant swagger, often passing by Aaliyah with a patronizing grin. It made her skin crawl, but she held her head high. She would not be intimidated. When the day of the evidentiary hearing finally arrived, Aaliyah walked into court with Carmela by her side once more, brandishing a slew of documents. They had assembled everything from Aaliyah's phone GPS records, showing she was within the speed limit, to sworn affidavits from colleagues who had been on the phone with her minutes before the stop. Despite the missing dashcam footage, they hoped their mountain of evidence would highlight the baselessness of the charges. The hearing started with the prosecution's theatrics. The local DA's office had assigned a young, overeager assistant district attorney to handle the matter, and he repeated the same lines about reckless behavior, obstruction, and suspicious government documents. Kincaid, leaning back in his seat with arms crossed, watched with that same smug expression. Carmela countered each point with clarity. The reckless behavior claim was disproven by Aaliyah's phone data. The obstruction claim was contradicted by the official timeline that showed Aaliyah complied with the initial demands. As for the suspicious government documents, they produced a signed letter from the DOJ verifying that those documents were part of an active federal investigation, authorized to be in Aaliyah's possession. Judge Ross took it all in with a furrowed brow. But just as Carmela was about to drive the final nail into the coffin of Kincaid's case, an unexpected witness strode into the courtroom, a local mechanic from the police department. The young ADA hurriedly announced this was their key to proving the dashcam was indeed malfunctioning that night. The mechanic, a lanky man in his late 30s named Toby Mills, took the stand. He fidgeted, looking uncomfortable. He claimed he inspected Kincaid's cruiser and found the dashcam wiring corroded. For a moment, it seemed like the missing dashcam evidence might be logically explained. But under Carmela's cross-examination, Toby hesitated. He admitted that Kincaid himself had brought the cruiser in for repairs the morning after the arrest. Toby also acknowledged that in his 10 years of working with police vehicles, he had never seen such sudden, isolated corrosion that only affected the dashcam wires, leaving the rest of the wiring intact. Aaliyah watched Toby closely. His eyes flicked nervously toward Kincaid, who was glaring back at him. Toby swallowed hard. Something inside Aaliyah told her Toby wasn't telling the full story. Carmela pressed, "Are you absolutely certain the dashcam couldn't have been operational during that traffic stop?" Toby shifted in his seat, sweat beading on his forehead. "Well, it's possible it failed intermittently, or maybe it shorted out. It's not guaranteed, but from what I saw, the dashcam wouldn't have recorded properly." It was a half-hearted statement, but enough for the prosecution to cling to. Judge Ross eyed Toby for a moment, then sighed. "I will keep this in mind when considering the viability of the dashcam footage." After the mechanic's testimony, the prosecution seemed to relax, as if they believed they had successfully undermined any argument about the dashcam. But Carmela wasn't finished. She introduced the sworn statements from Aaliyah's colleagues, along with phone logs that proved her speed was consistent and not reckless. She also highlighted the lack of any official note on the traffic stop from the dispatcher, a glaring omission. Even so, Judge Ross refrained from delivering an immediate ruling to dismiss. "I want time to review this evidence thoroughly," he said, stacking the papers neatly. "We'll reconvene in 2 days. In the meantime, Miss Henderson remains bound by the conditions of her release, though I see no need to adjust bail." The gavel came down with a definitive thud, and the hearing was adjourned. Aaliyah's heart sank. She had hoped for a quick victory, an outright dismissal. Instead, she was stuck in the same limbo, with Kincaid's allegations still on the record. Afterward, as people filtered out of the courtroom, Kincaid approached Aaliyah with a vile grin. "You should just plead out," he taunted, voice dripping with condescension. "Save yourself the trouble, ma'am." Aaliyah squared her shoulders, refusing to let him see the tremor of anger behind her calm facade. "Not going to happen." He chuckled, looking around to see if anyone was watching, then leaned in closer. "You think you're special because you work for the DOJ? I've seen your type before. You climb a few rungs, forget your place." Before Aaliyah could respond, Carmela stepped in, glaring at Kincaid. "Back off." The officer's lips curved into a sneer. "Watch yourself, ladies," he whispered, then walked away. The moment he was out of earshot, Carmela let out a shaky breath. "He's baiting you, Aaliyah. Don't let him get under your skin." She nodded, but deep down, she knew he'd already burrowed into her subconscious with a twisted sense of dread. All her life, Aaliyah had followed the rules, excelled at everything she did. But Kincaid's hostility, combined with the inertia of the system, made her question if justice would truly prevail. As they left the courthouse, Carmela's phone buzzed. It was a news alert. A local station had just posted a clip from the hearing, framing it as Local cop under fire from federal prosecutor's allegations. The coverage was shallow, but the comment section was already a battleground. Some people defended the officer, believing that law enforcement could do no wrong. Others sided with Aaliyah, outraged at the blatant racial implications. Amid this whirlwind of public reaction, Aaliyah tried to maintain composure. She had a career, a reputation, and a set of ideals on the line. It wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about sending a message that no one was above scrutiny, not even a cop who reveled in abusing his authority. Night fell, and Aaliyah found herself in her small apartment perched on the edge of her couch with files spread across her coffee table. The overhead light cast a soft glow on the papers, but her eyes burned from exhaustion. She rubbed them, trying to stay focused on the drug trafficking case that loomed. She needed to be sharp for an upcoming meeting with a judge regarding a plea deal. But she couldn't keep her mind off Kincaid. It festered in her thoughts like a thorn embedded in her flesh. Her phone chirped, another text from Carmela. "Hang in there, we've got this." A flicker of gratitude warmed her, and she managed a slight smile. At least she wasn't alone. She closed the file for the night, letting her eyes rest, but sleep was elusive. Her mind replayed the traffic stop, Kincaid's sneer, the frustration of the court hearing, and the heartbreak of being seen by some as just another black woman in trouble with the law, rather than the accomplished prosecutor she was. The next morning, Aaliyah arrived at her office at the DOJ, coffee in hand, running on a few hours of restless sleep. As she navigated the corridors, she noticed sympathetic looks from coworkers. Some offered hushed encouragement. Others looked away, uncertain what to say. She knew the optics weren't good. For a federal prosecutor to be facing criminal charges, no matter how unfounded, was uncharted territory in the building. Her supervisor, Robert McMillan, called her in for a meeting. His office smelled faintly of lemon polish, the desk meticulously organized. Aaliyah had always admired his no-nonsense approach. He gestured for her to sit. "Aaliyah," he began, "we're all aware of your situation. First, let me say that you have the office's support. We've looked at your evidence, and it's quite clear these charges lack merit." Relief fluttered in her chest. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. "That said," he continued, knitting his eyebrows, "we need to protect the integrity of ongoing investigations. There's concern that the negative press might cast a shadow on any cases you're leading, especially the drug trafficking case." Her heart sank. "I understand, but I can still handle the case, right?" He exhaled slowly. "I'm considering reassigning you temporarily, just until this storm settles. It's not about doubting you, it's about optics. The defense attorneys in your drug case might seize on this as a credibility issue." The frustration in her swelled. She opened her mouth to protest, but she also understood the logic. "I see," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "I just hope it doesn't take too long to resolve." Leaving McMillan's office, Aaliyah felt a hollowness in her gut. Her best case, the one she'd poured so many hours into, was being pried from her hands. All because of a crooked cop who decided she looked suspicious. It was exactly the career sabotage she feared. She marched back to her workspace and sank into her chair. The luminescent hum of the office lights felt harsh. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself that she still had allies here. She wasn't alone. Carmela, McMillan, and others believed in her. But the system was large, and the pushback was real. That evening, after a stressful day of half-finished tasks and anxious phone calls, she went home and tried once more to piece together any overlooked angle. She combed through the events of the traffic stop, scribbling notes to see if there was any potential third-party witness. Maybe someone had captured something on their cell phone. Perhaps a traffic camera was operational near the intersection. She compiled a list of possible camera locations. If a local business camera had caught even a snippet of the stop, it might help exonerate her and expose Kincaid's lies. With renewed determination, Aaliyah spent the next day calling every business along the stretch of road where she was pulled over. Most had cameras pointed at their store entrances, not the street. But one place, a small restaurant called Sammy's Diner, had a surveillance camera that captured part of the roadway. She arranged a meeting with the owner, Sammy Green, an older gentleman who seemed wary but not unhelpful. She drove to Sammy's diner that afternoon, stepping into the cozy interior with checkered floors and vinyl booths. The smell of frying onions and grilled burgers wafted through the air. Sammy was behind the counter wiping glasses. He looked up with curious eyes. "You must be the lady who called," he said. Aaliyah approached, introducing herself politely. She explained the situation, without divulging too many details about her job, and asked if she could check the footage from that night. Sammy shrugged. "I got it all stored on a digital recorder in the back. You can take a look, but I've only got about a week's worth before it auto-deletes. Today's the last day for that date, so you're lucky." She felt a surge of excitement. Maybe this was the break she needed. Sammy led her to a tiny back office, cluttered with boxes of napkins and condiments. A single monitor flickered with black and white security feeds. They navigated the archived files until they reached the date in question, around the time Aaliyah was pulled over. The footage wasn't top quality. It was grainy and partially obstructed by a lamppost. But there it was, the faint glow of police headlights at the edge of the screen. She could see her car pulled over. Then a figure who looked like Kincaid approached. Another figure, presumably Aaliyah herself, exited the vehicle. Though the details were hazy, what followed was telling. Kincaid searched the trunk, rummaging around. Another patrol car arrived, lights flashing. Sammy winced. "That's a lot of commotion," he muttered. Aaliyah tried to make out more details, but the angle wasn't great. She couldn't see every detail of what transpired, like the aggression or the handcuffing. However, what was captured might still help. The timestamp showed the exact time they arrived at the scene, proving the short duration between the initial stop and when Kincaid claimed she was resisting. She asked if Sammy would be willing to provide the footage to the court, or at least to her legal team. He seemed hesitant at first. No one wants to get on the wrong side of the police, but eventually agreed. "Look, lady, I don't know what exactly happened, but if it helps clear things up, I'll give you a copy." Armed with this new piece of evidence, Aaliyah felt a renewed spark of hope. She rushed to share the footage with Carmela. Together they reviewed it frame by frame. It wasn't a silver bullet that would automatically exonerate her, but it was a big step in proving the timeline. The clip showed that less than 2 minutes passed from the moment Kincaid approached her to when backup arrived and she was led away in cuffs. It hardly suggested a protracted period of resisting. Furthermore, her body language in the footage looked calm, hardly the signs of someone violently obstructing justice. They prepared a supplemental filing to submit this footage for the judge to review. In the meantime, they also pressed on with the internal affairs complaint. Something else weighed on Aaliyah's mind. Toby Mills, the mechanic. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was withholding the truth about the dash cam. When the next court date arrived, Aaliyah and Carmela stood before Judge Ross once again, introducing the newly discovered diner footage. They explained its significance, playing the short clip on a small monitor. The prosecution tried to dismiss it as inconclusive. Kincaid watched with crossed arms, jaw clenched, but that mocking glint in his eye didn't fade. Judge Ross studied the grainy video. "The angle isn't the best, but it does indicate that Miss Henderson was not engaged in prolonged resistance," he said, a note of gravity in his voice. "I'd like an explanation from the officer or the prosecution as to why the official record suggests a drawn-out confrontation." The prosecution fumbled, claiming that the vantage point was incomplete and that there could have been more resistance off camera. But the seed of doubt was planted firmly in the judge's mind now. By the end of the hearing, the judge indicated he was leaning toward dismissing at least some of the charges, pending any further evidence from the police. A flicker of relief spread through Aaliyah's chest. However, Judge Ross scheduled another review, stating he wanted to see if anything else would surface from internal affairs. "If I find that these charges were filed on spurious grounds," he warned, "there may be consequences for the arresting officer." As the hearing concluded, Aaliyah gathered her files, trying to maintain composure. Outside, Carmela gave her a side hug. "We're winning," she whispered. Just as they stepped into the hallway, they spotted Kincaid quietly berating the young prosecutor who had been representing him. He looked furious, gesturing at the monitor where the diner footage was still paused. Then he stormed off in Aaliyah's direction. She steeled herself, prepared for more intimidation. He halted inches from her face, voice a low hiss. "Don't think you've won. You might have friends in high places, but I've got friends too. One phone call, and you'll wish you never tried to smear my name." Carmela tried to step between them, but Aaliyah held her ground. "I'm not smearing your name, Officer Kincaid. I'm telling the truth. I guess that concept is foreign to you." His lips twitched with suppressed anger. "Oh, trust me. You'll regret this." Before she could respond, he spun on his heel and stalked away, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. 2 days later, Carmela called Aaliyah with a surprise development. "You won't believe this. Toby Mills, the mechanic, reached out to me." Aaliyah paused. "He did? Why?" Carmela sighed. "He said he has information he was afraid to share in open court because Kincaid's colleagues were there. Apparently, Toby thinks the dash cam was tampered with, intentionally." Aaliyah's pulse quickened. "So it wasn't just accidental corrosion?" "Exactly. He wants to meet off the record, says he'll bring documents." A flicker of hope and caution danced in Aaliyah's mind. This could be the smoking gun that proved the lengths Kincaid went to cover his misconduct. But it also carried risk. If Toby was stepping forward, it meant Kincaid might have allies who wouldn't take kindly to him blowing the whistle. They arranged to meet Toby at a small coffee shop near the edge of town. Aaliyah and Carmela arrived first, choosing a quiet corner table. 15 minutes later, Toby shuffled in, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He seemed jittery, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to burst in. "Thank you for coming," Aaliyah said softly as he sat down. Toby nodded, fiddling with his coffee cup. "I just can't keep quiet anymore. I've been a mechanic for the department a long time, and I've never seen a dash cam corrode like that overnight. When I opened the casing, I found marks that looked like they'd been physically scratched or pried. I also found some residue that might be from a chemical accelerant." He handed over a folder of photographs taken with his phone. Sure enough, the wires looked deliberately damaged rather than naturally corroded. Toby sighed. "Kincaid brought his cruiser in that morning, told me the dash cam had malfunctioned. I was suspicious, but I let it go. Then as the investigation heated up, he told me to keep my mouth shut. Implied that if I didn't, I'd lose my job, maybe worse." Aaliyah felt a surge of both anger and validation. If Toby's evidence was legitimate, it could demolish Kincaid's entire narrative. "Would you be willing to testify to this in court?" His eyes flickered with fear. "I'm scared. He's got connections. But I don't want to lie under oath, and I don't want to see innocent people get railroaded. If you subpoena me, I won't lie." They promised to keep Toby's identity as protected as possible while following legal procedures. Once he left, Aaliyah and Carmela stared at each other, hearts pounding. "This is it," Carmela said, voice brimming with excitement. "This is the proof we need to show that Kincaid destroyed evidence to cover his own wrongdoing." Aaliyah nodded, her mind already spinning with how to integrate this into their defense. "We'll file a motion to present Toby's testimony along with these photos. If the judge accepts this evidence, Kincaid's case crumbles." She also knew what this meant for her internal affairs complaint. If the department's internal review was still stalling, Toby's statements would light a fire under them. This could lead to an investigation not just into Kincaid's actions, but potentially others who aided in covering it up. The next hearing arrived in a flurry of anticipation. Aaliyah and Carmela filed their motions, presenting Toby's folder of photographs and his sworn affidavit. The prosecution, blindsided, scrambled to question the validity of the evidence. But Toby was there, ready to testify under subpoena. His nerves were apparent, but he told the court everything. How Kincaid brought in the cruiser, how the dash cam wires appeared intentionally damaged, and how he was told to keep quiet. Kincaid, seated behind the prosecution's table, looked ready to explode. His face reddened, his jaw clenched so hard a vein pulsed in his neck. Meanwhile, the judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at the photos Toby provided. The vibe in the courtroom shifted dramatically. A sense of growing outrage at Kincaid's potential misconduct filled the air. Carmela cross-examined Toby gently, reaffirming the key points. The young prosecutor on the other side tried to discredit him, suggesting Toby was incompetent or had a grudge, but Toby remained firm. "I've worked on 100 dash cams, never seen a case like this. Somebody messed with it, I'm sure." Judge Ross asked pointedly, "Officer Kincaid, do you have any explanation as to why your dash cam wires would appear intentionally damaged?" Kincaid's lawyer tried to object, stating his client had the right to remain silent in this hearing. Ross nodded but maintained a piercing gaze on the officer. "Given this new evidence," the judge said, "I have serious concerns about the veracity of the charges against Miss Henderson. I'm inclined to dismiss them outright if no convincing counterargument is presented." The prosecution had no real comeback. They hemmed and hawed, requesting a continuance to gather more information. But Judge Ross wasn't having it. He pounded his gavel decisively. "All charges against Miss Henderson are dismissed, effective immediately." A slow exhale of relief escaped Aaliyah's lungs. It was over. She was free from the false accusations. A hush followed, and then murmurs spread through the courtroom. The swirl of emotions, relief, vindication, anger at injustice, swelled inside Aaliyah. She glanced at Kincaid, whose face was twisted in fury and disbelief. For a moment she feared he might lunge at her, but he remained seated, fists clenched. Yet the drama wasn't finished. Judge Ross cleared his throat, voice echoing in the stunned silence. "Further, given the evidence that suggests Officer Kincaid may have tampered with official police equipment and provided false statements, I am forwarding this matter to the proper authorities for investigation." Kincaid slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. She set me up." Ross arched an eyebrow. "Officer, I suggest you remain silent and consult your attorney. We are done here." In the hallway after court adjourned, reporters swarmed around Aaliyah, peppering her with questions. She maintained a measured response, simply stating that justice had prevailed and that she trusted the system to investigate Kincaid's actions. Carmela handled the brunt of the press inquiries, allowing Aaliyah a chance to slip away to a quieter corner. But not before Kincaid cornered her one last time, a vein throbbing in his temple. His voice trembled with rage. "You think you've won? You're nothing, you hear me? I'll be back on the force and you'll be the one who's—" He was cut off by two internal affairs officers who approached, badges out, telling him they had questions for him. Aaliyah almost felt pity seeing him flail, but any sympathy was eclipsed by the memory of his sneer when he handcuffed her. She turned, leaving him to face his reckoning. In the days that followed, the local news exploded with the story of a racist cop caught tampering with evidence. Though official statements avoided the term racist, it was widely implied. Interviews with Toby Mills and coverage of the diner's footage dominated the headlines. Meanwhile, Kincaid found himself suspended without pay, pending a full investigation. It seemed that some of his fellow officers were distancing themselves, as allegations of past misconduct trickled into the public sphere. Aaliyah, relieved to have her name cleared, found support pouring in from colleagues, community members, and even strangers who heard her story. The Department of Justice also took note of her ordeal. Her supervisor, Robert McMillan, publicly praised her courage in the face of injustice and offered to reinstate her on the high-profile drug case. Even higher-ups in the DOJ privately commended her for upholding the law, no matter who the offender might be. There was talk of awarding her a special commendation for not backing down, but Aaliyah remained modest. She didn't relish the spotlight. She merely wanted to do her job, seeking justice for all, even if that meant holding a fellow law enforcement officer accountable. A few weeks later, after the dust had settled, an internal affairs investigation formally launched into Kincaid's history. Rumors circulated that multiple complaints had been filed against him over the years, most quietly dismissed or never fully investigated. Aaliyah hoped that any pattern of misconduct would now come to light, and that the city's police department would implement reforms to prevent this from happening again. During this period, Aaliyah received an unexpected letter from Judge Franklin Ross himself. It was brief but heartfelt, apologizing for any undue stress she experienced due to the court's initial reluctance to dismiss the charges. "The system is imperfect," he wrote, "but I am gratified to see the truth won out." In a stark turn of karma, the district attorney who had pursued the case on Kincaid's behalf faced scrutiny as well. The DA's office was criticized for taking the officer's word at face value without thoroughly vetting the charges. Some staff members were reassigned or encouraged to resign. The fiasco became a symbol of what happens when blind trust in law enforcement overrides the pursuit of actual justice. Meanwhile, Toby Mills, the mechanic whose conscience saved the day, found himself hailed as an unlikely hero. Public outcry demanded he be protected from retaliation. In a show of thanks, Aaliyah helped facilitate legal resources for him, ensuring he had representation if any threats arose. As for Kincaid, his downfall came swiftly. Evidence emerged of him fabricating reports in other cases and harassing minority drivers. His chain of allies began to fracture. One of his ex-partners turned over emails hinting at racist jokes Kincaid had shared. The department, now in damage control mode, gave him a choice: resign quietly or face termination and possible criminal charges. He chose to resign, but remained under investigation for the dashcam tampering and perjury. The final blow came when a grand jury indicted him for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. The same system he had tried to manipulate now aimed its spotlight on him. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse as he was led in, not in handcuffs but with a stoic expression that betrayed his panic. Aaliyah never took pleasure in someone else's ruin, but she couldn't deny a profound sense of relief that justice was being served. She resumed her duties as a federal prosecutor, diving back into the drug trafficking case with renewed vigor. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, yet the experience changed her. She no longer harbored the same unshakable trust in the system's infallibility. She had always believed in justice, but now she knew how fragile it could be when corrupted by biased or dishonest actors. Still, that knowledge also fueled her determination. She vowed to be an even fiercer advocate for those who faced injustice, especially when that injustice came from people in power. Weeks later, she walked into the Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse once again, but this time with a different stride. She wasn't the fearful defendant, but a prosecutor armed with a deeper understanding of how easily people could be victimized by a broken system. Her colleagues greeted her with respect. Some were even in awe of her resilience and courage. Carmela, now a close friend as well as a colleague, met her at the courtroom doors. "Ready to go after the bad guys again?" she asked with a grin. Aaliyah returned the smile, nodding. "Always." They stepped into the courtroom side by side, prepared to do what they did best: fight for justice. Meanwhile, Kincaid's trial approached. Local headlines documented each development with fervor. Rumors flew about how he might try to plea out or cut a deal by exposing other corrupt officers in exchange for leniency. Aaliyah paid attention, but didn't obsess. She had learned to let the system take its course. If he ended up behind bars or on probation, that was for the judge and jury to decide. What mattered to her was that his victims, including herself, had a voice. And in the end, the broader community learned that no badge was above the law. People rallied for reforms, better oversight, functioning body cams, and accountability measures for officers. Aaliyah found solace in that. If her ordeal sparked positive change, perhaps it was worth the nightmare. Late one evening, as she wrapped up a successful day in court prosecuting her drug case, she paused in her office to reflect. She thought about how close she'd come to being silenced by fear or by systemic inertia. She remembered the gnawing terror when she felt those handcuffs tighten around her wrists, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal. That memory was branded into her consciousness, It was something she would never forget. But she emerged stronger, with a sense of empathy and resolve that couldn't be taught in law schools. She recalled the time she'd stood before a judge, zealously prosecuting criminals, always believing in the moral righteousness of law enforcement. Now she was keenly aware that the shield of authority could be misused. She would remain vigilant, ensuring that power was wielded with integrity. Taking one last look at her desk, where tomorrow's case files were neatly stacked, Aaliyah gathered her things. As she turned off the lights and stepped into the hallway, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the dark window. She saw not just a federal prosecutor, but a survivor, a fighter, and above all, a believer in true justice. In the months that followed, Kincaid went to trial for his role in tampering with evidence. Despite attempts to bargain, the overwhelming proof, especially Toby Mills's testimony, sealed his fate. He was found guilty of obstruction of justice and sentenced to prison. His unrepentant behavior during the trial only cemented the judge's decision to impose a stiff penalty. Aaliyah, meanwhile, continued her work at the DOJ, earning a reputation for fairness and tenacity. Her ordeal became a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. People whispered that if someone tried to railroad you, you'd want an advocate like Aaliyah Henderson on your side. She never reveled in the downfall of a man who once wore a badge. Instead, she channeled her energy into ensuring fewer people had to endure what she did. And every time she walked into that courthouse, she remembered the day a racist cop had laughed in her face, thinking she was powerless, only to discover that true power lies in the truth. And that, my friends, is the extraordinary story of how a seemingly routine traffic stop revealed one cop's shocking abuse of power, and how justice prevailed thanks to the relentless resolve of one woman who refused to be silenced. Aaliyah Henderson's journey reminds us all that no one is above the law, and no one should be judged merely by prejudice or appearances. Whether you're facing your own battles or simply cheering from the sidelines, let this stand as proof that truth and perseverance can tip the scales in favor of righteousness. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more eye-opening tales. Your support helps us continue shedding light on stories of justice, courage, and the power we all hold to make a difference. Thank you for watching.